Fresh kicks, cutting edge fashion, the hottest launch drops. Find your fit. Hibbett Sports is the destination.
I was recently invited to a behind the scenes look at a new game called The Finals, and it's possibly one of the most ambitious first person shooter games that I've seen in a long time. And based on the gameplay that I saw, it's definitely got some of the best destruction ever in a PvP game. It's being developed by Embark Studios, who themselves are a fairly new studio forming in November 2018. And one of the co-founders is none other than Patrick Sutherland, who was the executive vice president at EA and also the CEO of DICE at one point. And in relation to that, there's a lot of ex-DICE developers working at Embark, and you can definitely feel and see those Battlefield, Battlefront vibes in the gameplay trailer. Now, you may have heard of another game that this studio are developing called Arc Raiders. Not much is known about that, but we have seen some footage already. Now, these two games couldn't be more different though. The Finals is a team-based first-person shooter, which on the surface may not sound that groundbreaking, but it's the level of interaction with the environment and the destruction that looks to set this game apart. It's described as a first-person shooter that pushes environmental dynamism, destruction and player freedom to the limits. It also happens to be free to play. At its basic level, you play as a contestant in an over-the-top ultimate entertainment game show. And the developers make no bones about the fact that this is not a hyper-realistic game. Its purpose is to be over-the-top and, most importantly, fun. And you play in squads of 3 against 3 other teams, so that's 12 players in total. Although the game is in early development, so nothing is truly locked in just yet. When you join a match, you need to hunt down boxes of cash that dynamically spawn into the level. When you find them, you take them to an extraction point and hold that point for a short period of time to bank that cash. There is a leaderboard in the game that shows which team have deposited the most money, and once one box is extracted, another will spawn somewhere to replace it. So the game is all about fighting for these resources across the map. The maps themselves are based on iconic real-world locations according to the developers. The trailer that you're watching in the background here is loosely based on Monaco's Old Town. And while they didn't really want to get into too much detail about how many arenas or maps there would be at launch, they did say that they're currently playtesting multiple. Also, it's important to note that these maps are quite close quarters. Think city centre, downtown area, rather than a battle royale size map. Now, you may have noticed the biggest feature of the entire game is destruction, and the developers have said that the entire level can be destroyed, from small items such as furniture all the way up to large buildings. And as you can see in this gameplay footage here in the recent trailer they released, it looks very impressive at times. I'm not sure we've seen this kind of stuff for a while. It actually reminded me a lot of the destruction that we saw in some of the earlier Frostbite engine titles like Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3. This isn't just a small amount of debris though, we're talking full destruction across the whole level. And more importantly, Embark told us that they've managed to move destruction and movement to the server side rather than the client side, which is how most multiplayer games operate. And this means that for their game, that realistic collapsing of entire buildings is possible. And while I'm not a game developer, this is something that is apparently incredibly difficult to achieve. In fact, the developers working on this system have wanted to do something similar for years, but have been unable to until now. And they even mentioned the Holy Grail when talking to us about it, so you can appreciate how difficult a task this must have been to achieve. The destruction looks really good here.
I'm glad she
interesting to see exactly how this benefits the players when we finally get to jump into the game. One of the things that the server-side destruction and player movement brings though is actually shown off quite well in the trailer. When the side of a building is destroyed, it almost becomes its own platform, falling to the floor with a player on top of it. And you can imagine some of the gameplay opportunities that might revolve around this. Now, alongside the destruction, you can also interact with physical objects around you, pick them up, throw them, and while not everything can be interacted with their current build, that's what they're aiming for ultimately. You can even set things on fire, and we do get to see a little bit of that in the trailer. There are also other factors at play here apart from the destruction, including a dynamic weather system and a dynamic time of day. The devs didn't go into too much detail on how these systems will impact the gameplay, but they did say that they want players to have to adapt to different circumstances. At its core though, the finals, it still looks like it's a shooter with the time to kill slightly on the longer side. There were also all sorts of guns on display in the gameplay, from an M60 machine gun to a Mac-10, a Magnum, a flamethrower, what looked like an M1 Garand, an AK, and of course the friend of destruction, the grenade launcher. It's very reminiscent of how Battlefield used to play out, when you would find a player hiding in a building, just go ahead, take the building out. We also saw a goo gun, and we did get to see some gameplay of that in the trailer. It emits a big area of goo or foam that can be used to either reinforce buildings or to block areas off entirely, and also use it to build bridges and create new pathways to higher or lower ground. The devs told us too that they want complete freedom to set up your player character however you want. This means both visual and gameplay customization, and they showed us quite a few examples of how these player characters can differ, from an ancient warrior to a ballerina, yes I said ballerina, a mime, as well as a more standard looking character, and some really bizarre ones. There's a lot of variation here. You could also build out your abilities and loadout, and because of the degree of customization, you can essentially create a more glass cannon ninja, so a character that can move around really nimbly but has a lot less health, or say a tank with a rocket launcher that can be the one who destroys buildings for your team. We were told that these characters are ones that you build yourself rather than them being provided, and customization then allows the player to play how they want and how they look, and this seemed to be a big point. In fact, they want this game to be as intuitive as possible, so if you think in your head that something should work, it probably will if you test it, and at the very least they want to make a game that says yes more than it says no. Wrapping things up, the finals is still in very early development, but what I did like was that the devs were open to feedback and change if it's needed. Nothing is currently locked in, and with a closed alpha coming up, they want all the feedback they can get, but you need to be warned, they have made it very clear that there are many experimental features in this game, and they're pushing the boundaries of that technology, and with that comes bugs. There's going to be a lot to iron out, so bear that in mind if you get to try the alpha. There's a big ambition with the finals, no doubt, and while it could be easy at first glance to think that this is a generic arena FPS or a game similar to many others that have come before it, it's definitely pushing some envelopes, and it's a high tempo game with character abilities and fall destruction, and I'm absolutely on board with that. I hope they can pull it off in the long run. It's just so cool to see this level of destruction again. So that's all. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. How do you feel about this one? If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time.